Because that's essentially what we're discussing here is how do you know the difference between a brief valley that you have to get through versus signs that this is actually something that needs to end. Welcome back to Brojo Online. Today we're going to talk about the dilemma of whether or not you should leave your partner. Probably my most viewed video on YouTube to date is the one about should I leave my partner or not. So it seems like this is a pretty big problem and I wanted to dive deeper into it because the video just covered a little bit. So we're going to go a bit deeper. We're going to talk about commitment and loyalty. We're going to talk about what it's like to be in a long-term committed relationship, one where you've officially said we are together. And then how do you tackle the problem of wanting to go somewhere else occasionally from time to time? How do you know when it is actually time to leave, when somebody else is actually a better deal and it makes sense to leave them, versus when is this just a temptation to be ignored or avoided or dismissed and to continue on being loyal? Statistically speaking, people in healthy long-term relationships just do better in life. Okay, now that's not going to be every one of you. Some of you will be the exception where it's better off that you are single and so on. But generally speaking, if you're in a happy marriage, not just any marriage, but a happy one, you'll live longer, you'll report being happier, just everything will go better. Finances, everything. So it's really worth considering carefully before you leave a long-term relationship if you are making the best move for your overall quality of life. That being said, staying in a bad fit relationship is like the opposite. It's way better to be single in terms of your health and quality of life than to be in an abusive relationship or an unloving relationship or one that's just simply no interest in the other person. So it's an important decision, worth a bit of thought, and certainly not something you should do impulsively or off the top of your head with emotions. So let's start from the beginning with the definitions. What does it mean to commit? What does loyalty mean? What should it mean for a high quality of life? I often like to think of the difference between a commitment and a promise. Okay, a promise is saying, I will do something. A commitment is doing the thing. It has a presence to it. If I commit to being in this relationship, what I mean is right here, right now, I'm going to be in this relationship, whatever that means. Be present. My behavior will be the behavior of a person who's really in with this relationship. For example, if I'm going to play with my daughter, I don't do it distracted on my phone, kind of, yeah, this is fun. To commit would be to really play with her like this is the last time. Be the same in a loving relationship. If I'm going to really be with my wife, it means I'm going to pay attention to her, listen to her, make plans with her, do everything where I'm like someone who's going to be here long term. You know, booking a holiday in 3 months' time rather than saying maybe one day we'll go on a holiday. There's a big difference between a promise and a commitment. A commitment really feels like you're already in. A promise is saying, I will be in later. Feels almost the same. In fact, you get a big reward from promises. You often get positive approval reactions from promises, but they are not the same as a commitment, and quite often they are a pseudo commitment. Saying, I will marry you one day is not really a commitment. It's actually putting off a commitment. Saying, will you marry me right now is a commitment. And I'm not saying you have to do that, I'm just sort of pointing out the difference between the two. Now, a lot of people, they're quite fragile in their relationships. They can end it at any time because it's built on promises rather than commitments. They're saying, you know, yes, we will be together long term rather than I'm going to behave like we're going to be together long term. It's a subtle difference, but you can see it when it's happening. Now, there's a slight difference, in my opinion, between commitment and loyalty. Loyalty is kind of saying, I will stick with you no matter what happens. Again, there's a kind of a promise element to that. I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to maintain this. A lot of people, I think, are stuck on bad loyalty. They say, I'm going to stick with this thing no matter what happens. But when those conditions actually come through, they end up staying with something that's not healthy for them. For example, if I say, I'm going to stay at this job for the rest of my life, and then it gets bought out by a new company who treats all the staff like shit and changes everything, then am I really still loyal to the original agreement? Am I still loyal to the original company? Or has the company actually changed and I'm no longer beholden to this loyalty? I didn't commit to this company. It's the same with a marriage. If I say I commit to you, I'm not saying I'm committing to you if you become a different person, right? I'm committing to what I'm signing up to this now, here. If this significantly changes, then we've got to renegotiate this agreement. Some people think loyalty is no matter what you end up becoming, I'll stick with you. This idea that a person is always the same person for their whole life, and that's just not the case. You can be deceived into thinking there's something they're not, and it only gets revealed later. This is quite often the case in abusive relationships. They're not abusive at the start, they reveal themselves to be an abuser later on. You didn't commit to an abuser, you committed to the nice person. Or just people change over time. That's the thing. You cannot be loyal to someone under the impression that they will not change. Human beings always change, constantly change. I mean, right now, as I'm talking, particles are leaving my body, new particles are being formed and taken in. I'm literally changing physiologically as I speak. My beliefs change on a minute by minute basis, even though it's even so slightly. But if you look at me now versus 10 years ago, it's two different people almost. And this is nearly everybody. Very few people maintain a really consistent personality and belief system forever. So when you're making a commitment, when you're saying loyal, there needs to be some conditions about what that would be broken by. If I say I'll be loyal to you unless you murder my whole family, that's kind of fair enough. But if I say no matter what kind of demon you turn out to be, I'm going to stick with you, well, that's not really values based. That's just blind loyalty. But what is a commitment? I had a friend who had been married for like 15 years or something before I was even in a long-term relationship. And they had three kids, and I was just like, dude, how the fuck do you do it? Because back that time in my life, I just couldn't comprehend marriage. Couldn't comprehend staying with someone forever. I was like, how the fuck do you do it, dude? And I'd always been on the assumption that people who can last a long time together either deluding themselves or they just feel the love all the time, and so there's no reason to leave. And he woke me up to a new concept, which is he started talking about how sometimes they don't actually love each other, that it comes and goes in like these peaks and valleys, and that sometimes they can't stand each other, and sometimes they really love each other, and it comes and goes. And he said loyalty and commitment, or what he was talking about was marriage, is the bridge over these valleys. So that when times get tough and you don't like each other anymore, you still maintain a respectful behavior towards each other, a loving behavior towards each other, and just wait patiently for the feelings to come back. Now, obviously, he has some idea that there could be a limit to that. If the feelings never come back, it might need to be reconsidered. But because they've been through so many ups and downs, they know that this happens, and therefore they're not going to react to a valley or overreact to a dull time. They're not going to overreact to a time where things get a bit rough or boring. Instead, they're going to maintain good behavior towards each other, loyal, loving behavior, marriage behavior rather than like passion behavior, to see if we can get through the valley together. I've since been through this experience myself. With my wife and I, it goes up and down. It's up enough for me to go, this is worth sticking with because it always comes back up. But there are hard times. Sometimes it's external circumstances. I was having a lot of immigration issues when I first came to Czech Republic, put a real strain on our whole life, including our relationship. The commitment bridged us through that so that when that strain lifted, we were still together and then the good times came again. There's been times where my wife's been through periods of depression. She can't love anybody or anything when she's in those moments. But I understand that that's not about me. That's not a sign of how good the relationship is. I just got to bridge through this valley, and then when she comes out on the other side, I'm still there, and she loves me again. Same thing when my daughter was born, and we didn't sleep for, well, to date, we haven't slept, but the first few months, particularly the first year, was just so rough. There was just no good feelings to have, let alone share with anybody else. And so again, we just bridged through it by still behaving as man and wife and still treating each other well and not going anywhere else and so on. So that's often what commitment means to me, is that I will maintain the present, engaged, enthusiastic behavior regardless of the feelings. I'm not going to be like, this commitment depends on me wanting to do it and me feeling like it right now. More like understanding a kind of discipline. It's like working out. I don't have to feel like going to the gym to know it's a good idea to keep going. So I keep going no matter how I feel. I know it's a good idea to stay in this relationship, so I stay in this relationship no matter how I feel. Now, obviously, straight away you're going to be thinking, but what if it's a bad relationship and that's why you feel this way? And we're going to get to that as well to know the difference. Because that's essentially what we're discussing here is how do you know the difference between a brief valley that you have to get through versus signs that this is actually something that needs to end? One of the things you got to get your head around right out of the gate is nothing that's long term is going to be blissful forever. All right. I think that's the main problem people have is things get a bit rough and a bit difficult, a bit emotional, and they think that's a sign that it must be bad because they have this idealistic picture in their head that something that's good will always feel good, which is just delusional and quite pathetically naive, to be frank. And I don't say that to judge you because I used to have this belief too. I get why people believe this. But there's nothing that's good all the time. Nothing. It's not possible to enjoy something all the time because the human brain always upgrades what satisfies it. So what you used to find exciting is just entitlement now, right? Like you can't maintain yay about something. Once you get used to it, that goes, yeah, it drops down. So for that very reason, even if the other thing never stops being as good as it was, you can't feel that way about it all the time. You take anything, take your favorite hobby and just do it non-stop and see what happens to you. Right? Don't ever take breaks from it. Let's say you like dancing. Dance for 8 hours a day, every day, and see if the love still stays the same day after day after day. Now, some of you are very enthusiastic. It might last a few days, but after a while, it starts to wear out a little bit. You start to go, fuck, is there something else I should do? And so this idea that something will always feel yay good, like that honeymoon period you had at the start of the relationship will be the way you feel the whole way through, that's just silly. It's childish to believe that. However, we have to know the difference between that dropping down to like a manageable normal range versus signs that we're actually in a bad relationship and that high at the beginning was a delusion. And of course, it really just comes down to that difference between good loyalty and bad loyalty, you might say. Good commitment, bad commitment. Like I've mentioned before, blind loyalty dismisses significant changes that weren't what you signed up for. When I was planning the wedding with my wife, one of the things I insisted on is that when we make vows, that they not be promises for the future, that they just be a commitment based on how we feel about each other right now. I can't even remember what they were, but it was not like, I'll love you forever no matter what happens, because I can't do that. I don't know. If she turned out to be a serial killer, I'm not going to be like, well, I signed up. I'm in it now, right? But there are certain things that I was aware of that I'd sign up with. If she has certain difficulties or struggles that I'm currently on board with, then I'm like, well, I'm signing up for you to continue being that way. One of the worst kinds of loyalty is I'm signing up on the condition that you're going to get better over time. Right, that's a terrible agreement. So no, no, you sign up for them as they are. If they get better, that's a bonus, but it cannot be a condition of the commitment. You're saying, I'm going to be in a relationship with you, but in your head you're thinking, so long as you become a nicer person and, so on and so forth, then you're not really making a commitment to who they are. You're making a commitment to the promise who they might be, which is not fair on them. And a lot of people do this. By the way, if you like what you're hearing, you're enjoying the podcast, please check out the link below to join Brojo or get in touch with me personally if you want to talk about one-to-one coaching, dan@brojo.org. You've also got to take into account what we might call natural deterioration. If you're going to commit to someone, understand that they are going to get older and more tired, more slow, sicker as time passes. They aren't going to maintain the things that just cannot be maintained by any human being. So if you're signing up long term, you're also signing up to a kind of, call it inflation. The things that you like about them may dim a little over time, just as you will dim over time. And you can't expect them to maintain something that's not humanly possible, right? When somebody's 80 years old, they're not going to look like a 25-year-old. When somebody's 50, they're not going to have the memory of a 30-year-old. So you got to sign up with a bit of like life wisdom if you're going to make a commitment. But the beautiful thing is you don't actually have to make a time-based commitment. You can just make a values-based commitment. If you keep being the person that you basically are, with this value system, the way you treat me, the way you are, and that doesn't change too much, then I'll be on board with that for as long as I can be. That's different to saying, like, no matter who you turn into, I'll stick with you. It's also different to saying, like, if I get a little bit bored of this one day, I'm just going to bounce, right? It's kind of saying, I'm gonna bridge through the valleys on the condition that you don't become a completely different person. Weak loyalty is only being as loyal as your options, as they say. Like, you say, I'll sign up to you unless a slightly better option comes across my path, and then I'm out. Now, a lot of you might be watching or listening to this because that's what's happening to you right now, is things got a little bit less exciting with your current partner, and then somebody exciting jumped into your frame. If you're thinking, well, that's a reason to leave the relationship, then you have weak loyalty. Now, that doesn't mean that you're also in a good relationship. These are separate considerations we must make. So, the real threat that we're going to be talking about today is attraction. Okay. To have a romantic interest in somebody else. That is the doorway that opens up this dilemma of should I stay or go? It is, I think, delusional and far too optimistic to think you'll never be attracted to somebody else. Some people report that they really believe that once they found their true love, they'd never find anyone else even remotely interesting. I'm not sure I believe them. We'll say for the sake of argument they're not lying. If nothing else, they are rare. Most of the rest of us are normal primates, and we are going to have our brain synapses fire off when we see and encounter certain things, particularly the timing of it. If we're having a rough patch with our partner and somebody who has all the traits that we think they're missing shows a real interest in us and they look great, yeah, we're going to have a physical reaction to that. We're going to have a biological, biochemical reaction to that beyond our willpower. The question comes is, what are we going to do about that reaction? So I think we'll always be prone to finding somebody else attractive. In fact, we should consider that a threat that needs to be managed, a threat to our relationship. Rather than being naive and thinking I don't need to worry about that, or being delusional and thinking attraction tells me where I should go, so as soon as I'm attracted to someone else, it means it's time to bounce. Rather thinking I'm going to be attracted for all the wrong reasons. I'm going to be attracted no matter what, beyond my control. It is not a sign of how things are going in my relationship. It's just something that needs to be managed. Just like if I want to stay clean from alcohol, I've got to stay away from pubs. And I've got to make sure I don't even have a sip. I think in modern times, more than ever before, people take attraction as a sign of like truth. Like attraction and a good fit are the same thing. So if you're attracted to someone, it means that they're right for you and you should go towards them. I can't think of a belief that's as delusional as that. We can be attracted to all the wrong people for all the wrong reasons. Doesn't mean attraction's totally inaccurate either, but especially just physical attraction like that instantaneous urge towards somebody that you know nothing about. That is so unlikely to tell you much of any value about their character, about how good you are going to be together in a relationship, and so on. Now, that's a bit different to the attraction that builds over time as you get to know someone, especially if you weren't that into them at the beginning, and then the more you learn about their personality and the more experiences you have together, you feel yourself becoming more interested in them. That's a bit more of an accurate form of attraction. But again, it doesn't mean that it's time to leave your current partner. You can have both. You can have a great partner and a great relationship that should be maintained for your quality of life and develop attraction for somebody else. Now, we'll get to later why you allowed that to happen, but for now, like those two things can be true at the same time. It doesn't mean this attraction over here doesn't mean that the relationship must be bad. And it doesn't mean that the relationship with this person will be better. And that's a key thing to keep in mind. The honeymoon period's always the best bit. It doesn't mean that you've got a good long-term relationship potential. See, a relationship and attraction are not the same thing. A connection and a relationship are not the same thing. I can be really attracted to someone without them being a good relationship fit. I can have a deep connection with someone, but if we had to actually get into a relationship, it wouldn't work out. That can happen. They are not guarantees of each other. Now, they can all happen, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for someone where there's attraction and connection and good relationship. Relationship being the sort of boundaries and the treatment of each other rather than the feelings. Connection being the feelings towards each other and the depth of interpersonal sharing and everything, and attraction just being how you feel when you look at them and how much time you want to spend with them. But these things are not indicative of each other. We cannot think that one equals the other, or we get into a right mess. And this is where I think most people in bad relationships, that's how it started. They thought attraction meant we're going to be good together. They thought connection meant we're going to be good together. In fact, they were so sure of it, they didn't bother to set boundaries. They didn't bother to talk about what it means to be in a relationship. They figure, hey, we like each other, it should work out. Well, 50% global divorce rate disproves that notion big time. There's always going to be this threat. And sometimes I think the biggest threat is really the emotional connection threat. I mean, if you're pulled away from your relationship by just a bit of physical attraction, then you're really not into your relationship. Like, if that's enough for you to leave or cheat, just like slight interest in someone, like if you're the kind of guy that like will cheat with your wife with some girl that you met at a nightclub that night, so it's basically just a physical thing, um, then you are very weakly committed to your relationship. It doesn't mean that you're in a bad relationship, it means that you're not committed to it. In which case, for the sake of your partner, you should leave. You should protect her from your damaging psychological issues. But most of the time, I think what I'm addressing here is when a bit more than that has happened, like when you've developed a bit of a crush on someone else. The workplace is particularly threatening for this. This is where it most likely is to happen, I believe, statistically. You'd have to check me on that one. I can't like recall a study off the top of my head. But I think that the biggest threat to a relationship is the connections people have at their workplace, or, to a lesser extent, maybe at their hobbies, anywhere where they're seeing someone a lot and actually building a long-term connection with them. Somebody pointed this out the other day, and I can't remember who, some online influencer. They were talking about how the workplace is such a threat because of the nature of working together is so positive. You succeed in doing these projects together. You're only seeing the good side of each other. You're having just enough time together with your best energy of the day to like really see the best of each other. And you're not seeing all the shit stuff, right? You never have to like share a bathroom with each other. You never have to deal with the person's period or anything like that. So you're just getting this like highlights reel of this other person, and they're really enthusiastic about you and you achieve things together, and it might really contrast from what you're seeing at home. You're struggling with your wife to agree on like how to get the reno and the house done or whatever. So you got this person at work seems like an angel, and then you come to this other person, you're like, oh, you're like knackered compared to that. And that could be a really threatening comparison. Now it's not an accurate comparison. The ironic thing is when your wife goes to work, some guy feels that way about her, and when this work person you got a crush on goes home, her husband's like, oh God, right? Like, you're not seeing the full picture. It's very hard to compete. And I think that's where the biggest threat comes to a healthy relationship, is where the highlights reel versus the whole picture is just not a fair competition. There can also be an underlying background factor. It's probably the main background factor that I should highlight, really, is an avoidant attachment style. Maybe you've got a sex or a love addiction. Maybe you've got approval seeking addiction, nice guy syndrome. Maybe you've just got intimacy avoidance issues and avoidant attachment style. And so you've got this constant push to get away from intimacy, to get away from the threat of it, a constant push to seek validation, seek fresh, new approval from other people. And that sort of vague thing pushing you all the time will latch on to any opportunity. So if someone at work clearly has got a bit of a thing for you, you're just going to feel gravitated towards that as you try to self-sabotage your relationship subconsciously. And if you're not aware that you have this background underlying issue and you're carrying this around with you like a gun ready to shoot, you're not going to see that you're at risk in this way. And you're going to feel like the thing's just natural. You're just like, oh, this girl at work, I think we're meant to be together. Not like I have an avoidant attachment and I'll cling to anybody who even looks at me. You're not going to know the difference inside yourself. It won't feel any different. You won't know. But put it this way, if you're struggling to commit and maintain a commitment, that's a problem you have, not a problem with your partner, right? You're either choosing the wrong partner, so you don't want to commit to them, or you're making commitments and then wanting to break them, which means you have a loyalty issue. That's not their fault, right? That's probably some long-term childhood trauma type shit that you're bringing to the relationship that you haven't unpacked and dealt with properly yet. is where we can segue into why this problem comes up in the first place. Because that's the question you got to ask yourself more than anything else. How did I get to a position where I'm actually struggling to decide whether I should stay in a relationship? Like, that's a position that's symptomatic of deeper issues. Put it this way, a really confident, healthy person with a secure attachment style does not have this problem, ever. They're never put in a place where they have to choose between one or the other. They would never even allow that situation, that dilemma to occur. So the fact that you're here now speaks to much deeper issues. I'm not judging you. I have these issues. I had to sort through them myself. They still flare up from time to time. Almost everybody does. In fact, I think it's a safe approach to assume you might have this issue and to manage it appropriately. But let's unpack it. Why are you here? As I said, I think my theory is the biggest problem is an avoidant attachment style. Okay, you've got a deep down programming issue where you think intimacy is threatening. It's kind of what you might call a delayed fear of rejection. It's not that you're afraid they're going to reject you up front. So you're afraid you're going to reject you once you're all in, and that really will break your heart. You know, maybe like me when you're a kid, you moved schools a lot, so you kept losing best friends. It kept breaking your heart to develop a deep friendship. So you realize the safe thing is to not get deep with people so that when they're taken away, it doesn't hurt. Maybe you got crushed in a big breakup and your whole world was destroyed, and your brain just doesn't want that to happen again, so it won't let you get to a position where it could. It won't put you in that vulnerable place again. Anxious attachment styles, you're more worried about the rejection up front. You're more worried about a no at any time, right? And so you cling to them to try and prevent that no from happening. This person's far less likely to have the dilemma of wanting to go to another partner. They're more worried about losing the one they have to somebody else. So if you've got this avoidant attachment style that you're unaware of or you haven't dealt with, it's going to be constantly fighting against intimacy. And so ironically, the better the relationship you're in, the more likely you are to sabotage it. You'll actually stay in abusive relationships or bad fits, no problem at all, because there's no real fear of intimacy there. You're not going to get close. You can't get your heart broken because you don't give a fuck about them. When somebody you actually care about, it's high stakes, this could be great, you could be happy, your brain goes, but then you could be destroyed by it and starts to like try and prevent that harm from happening. I remember having this when my avoidant is my kind of baseline setting that I have to battle to become secure on a daily basis. When my daughter was born, I was just like, fuck, what if she dies first? That would crush me, absolutely devastate me. And I can see it creates a temptation for me to distance myself from her. I don't give in to that temptation, but I see other dads who have. There's one I can think of in particular. I won't name him. But he actually would tell his daughter, like, don't get too close to me in case I die. He's got this thing like, getting close is going to hurt, so let's not even bother. Let's just cut to the chase. This is going to end at some point. Let's make sure that doesn't hurt. And a lot of people have this avoidant attachment, and it manifests as attraction to other things, cheating, porn addiction, anything to get away and break the connection. Often dishonesty. Secrecy is a great way to keep the connection from being too intimate. Look, divorce rates are average 50% globally. I've already done a whole podcast deep dive into divorce. And infidelity is a big factor in that, right? We are constantly tempted to go somewhere else. And people who don't manage this properly allow it to destroy their relationships. Fact is, even if you are in a bad relationship, infidelity is a very poor way of managing that problem. I mean, generally that's secretly going to somebody else, which means you're not having conversations to try and repair the relationship, and all those conversations aren't working. Put it this way, like if you're really healthy, you'd end the relationship before cheating. So if you're engaging in infidelity or tempted to or whatever, and you're still in this relationship, then you've got a problem with ending things or setting boundaries or enforcing boundaries. That's a you problem, not a partner problem. And I think we slip into it gradually. It starts with things like porn or allowing ourselves to indulge in fantasies or allowing that workplace, colleague friendship to develop a bit more than it needs to for the sake of the work. Allowing yourself to slip into validation seeking or getting approval. It could be thirst trap posting on Instagram, or it could be, flirting with the cafe barista, or it could be just looking at pictures online. This thing where you just start to blur the lines of loyalty. You do things where you know that if they caught you doing it, you'd get a big red flush of shame. So you can tell yourself it's okay to do it, you're not doing anything that major, but you also know if they knew you were doing this, there would be a problem. So you know you're crossing some sort of line, but you're just putting a toe over it and talking yourself into taking further steps. I think it also comes from a belief that the grass is greener. If you've got issues in your relationship, maybe she's on her period, maybe he's really stressed out with work, maybe you're long distance, you start to think that like this problem won't happen somewhere else. Somebody else, there's this, perfect relationship waiting for me, and this must be a sign that I'm not in it. Particularly around the concept of emotional hassle and inconvenience. If you're not enjoying all the emotions all the time with your partner, you start to indulge in the fantasy that maybe you would with someone else. It's so funny whenever my brain brings up somebody else I could be with, maybe someone from my past who I had a fling with, something like that, where there was nothing but good times, very briefly. I just map out like what would it actually be like to be in a relationship with them, and my logic just determines it would be basically more of the same. That let's say your partner's really grumpy when she's on her period. You think the other girl won't be? You think her menopause won't be the same as every other menopause? You think she won't have emotional issues? And sure, there are people who are a bit more optimistic or positive or fun to be around, but you think you won't get annoyed with that ever? As we start to tell ourselves the story that like being with someone else will definitely be better based on no information. We haven't been with the other person. We haven't figured out what it's like. They've got ex-partners. Why did their partners leave? Right? If they're so great, how come they're single? Like, we don't ask these questions. And this is just all about like blurring the lines. Like I said, pushed by avoidance, or maybe we're actually in a bad relationship, but we're too scared to like tackle it directly. We just start sort of straying. Because, like I said, you've got to ask yourself, how did I get to the position where I'm actually in a dilemma of choosing between two people? How did the second person even be allowed to get to this kind of pedestal in my life? How did I let that happen? And you'll find it's this fudging, this blurring of the lines slowly over time, where the thing just sort of seemed to develop naturally, but actually you were kind of opening doors one at a time to allow that progression. I think there's a lot of confusion, the difference between like a relationship getting a bit stale, a bit boring, a bit familiar, and actually being in a bad relationship. Like those are not the same thing. There's no person who's that amazing to be with all the fucking time. You show me any amazing person, and I'll show you a partner who's tired of their shit. Everybody's just a human, and you've just been seeing highlight reels. But when you're with someone in a relationship, what you get to see is the big picture. Now, sometimes that big picture is revealing that they're really not someone you should be with. But most of the time, what you just see is just people are people. Their shit stinks. They have annoying habits. Sometimes they're in bad moods. That's normal. That every relationship's going to have that. That's not abuse. That's not mean. Doesn't mean you're with a narcissist. Okay, it just means you're with a human being. So if you're with someone and it feels like it's getting a little bit dull, that's not necessarily the same thing that they're a bad person for you, that you're in an unhealthy relationship that can't go the distance. But if you allow yourself to believe that that's true, especially if you do nothing to address it, then you can start to engage in this fantasy, hey, somebody else will be better, and then your brain will start with confirmation bias looking for that someone else and projecting a kind of angel vision onto them. There's a client I was working with who cheated, and he felt like the person he cheated with was this perfect angel, and she was cheating on her partner with him. It's like, dude, this perfect angel is a cheater. How do you not see that? How do you not see she's a normal human being with flaws and fallacies, right? There's no way she's perfect if she's doing this with you. If she was perfect, she wouldn't go anywhere near you because she'd be loyal to her husband, right? So we can be so blind to that other person, that crush. It's called the halo effect. We only see these positive things about them. We don't see the full picture because we've allowed ourselves to narrow our vision like that. I think it can also come from that ideal of the one, that Disney ideal. I don't know if the Gen X's and I don't know if the Gen Zs and the younger generation still have this shit, but my generation, millennials and above, we are really sold on the idea that there's a soulmate, this one person for you. And I think many of us took that to mean that we would just feel great about the person all the time. There's two problems with that. One is there's no such thing as the one. I mean, there was 3 billion people when I was a kid, and there's now 8 billion. We've got no problem fucking each other. We're not that strict with our standards, right? Secondly, like even if someone is a great fit for you and the best fit you could possibly ever find, it doesn't mean they're going to be flawless people, right? Those two things are not the same. In fact, if they're really great for you, you're going to love them with their flaws. You'll find their flaws cute or endearing, or you'll just be like, this is worth it. There's some things my wife does that annoys me, but I think, that's just the payment for the great stuff. I'm willing to make that payment. There's other stuff that like first it annoyed me, but over the years I've come to love it as like the little quirks that make her who she is. I can see the same thing. Sometimes my daughter's having a tantrum, it's like so cute. So when I really love someone, I actually start to develop a passion for the things that aren't what you might call positive traits. Okay. There's also self-distrust. I think this can be a big problem. If you've made bad choices in the past, relationship-wise, if you're in a pattern of making bad choices and you're aware of that, then you're going to become less and less keen to follow through on the decisions you've made, and maybe for good reason. You may, in fact, be in another bad relationship for all the same reasons you were in the previous ones. And that makes it a really tricky dilemma to figure out. Should I still be in this relationship? Is somebody else a better choice? But if that's always been your dilemma, then that's actually one of your problems. Maybe you haven't seen what it's like when you fully commit, and maybe you aggravate bad behavior from your partner by being avoidant and detached. But this makes it really difficult to choose. I think a big one on both sides is dishonesty. Dishonesty, especially at the start. One of the reasons we have the honeymoon period in a relationship is because people aren't fucking honest at the start. They only show the highlight reel. It's one thing that I learned the long hard way. And when I first met my wife, I was really no different to how I am now. And that was very important that I do that. And it's important that I make sure she does that as well. There were a lot of conversations at the start where I revealed like the dark truths about myself. I let her see what I'm really like. I didn't put an extra effort into hygiene or dates or anything that I wouldn't do 10 years from now. And I insisted that she do the same. I was like, just show me who you really are. Say what you really mean. Don't pretend. Don't try and amp up your mood or anything like that for me. Let me see what you really are. Because if I like that, then I'll keep liking that. Right? There won't be this drop off in 3 to 6 months' time where you kind of let go of the act. I'm like, oh. And I think so many people do this and they provoke the partner into doing this as well because they're both doing it. And they're just setting each other up for a disappointment. I think a lot of the time it's when that high wears off that we go, oh, it feels like we've actually dropped down. Even though the person's still good, it's just they set an even higher expectation that they can't maintain. So you've got to insist on honesty on both sides from the very beginning. If you're someone who farts a lot, keep farting, right? If you're someone who is going to not wear makeup at home, then don't wear makeup, right? If you're someone who likes to play video games, don't pretend you don't play video games. Like, make sure that whatever they sign up to at the start is maintained and sustained, not an act that's going to eventually fall down. Or even if you keep it up, you're going to build up resentment and exhaustion. Like, no acting at the beginning goes a long way to creating easy commitment and loyalty because you know that you're signing up to something that's going to maintain. Enough of the what and the why. Let's tackle with how to deal with this dilemma. So here you are. You're in a relationship, committed to someone. You're not convinced that they're a terrible person. This isn't like an easy fix. They were great until this other person showed up. Okay, so you're in that situation where you're interested in someone else whilst also being pretty sure that you've got an okay partner and you're in this dilemma. You're very sure that your partner is a bad partner, break up with them. This isn't a dilemma at all. You've only got one life. You shouldn't spend it in a shit relationship. So this isn't a dilemma if that's the case. What I'm talking about is when you're not sure. They're both good options. Should you shift? Here's my top advice for this. Assess each person one at a time, starting with your current partner. This is not a competition between two people. Do I stick with current partner or choose the other one? No, cut that out. The first question is, do I stick with current partner? And that's the only question you're answering. This other person being attractive is not a factor in that decision. There will always be other attractive people. There will always be grass that's greener. That doesn't actually tell you how good your current relationship is. Because what I'd suggest, the easiest way to make this decision as healthy and as accurately as possible is that you're going to either stay with your partner or you're going to break up with them, be single for a while, and then pursue other people. You're not switching from one person to another. Because if nothing else, you want to work on your avoidant attachment. You want to get to a secure attachment style, which means you don't flick from one flower to a flower just because you're seeking pollen, right? That you see it through with the flower until it's no longer a good flower. And then you take a break, have some time to yourself, learn, reflect, become a better person, and then make sure you get into the next relationship a wiser person, right? So this is not a choice between two people. It's actually a choice about one person, your current partner. You've got to ask, what does it mean to have a good partner? What kind of relationship is worth sticking with through the hard times? What is it you're really looking for? When you think of sort of growing old with someone, what would make that worthwhile? What would make that better than being single or better than being promiscuous? Because those are the other options. First things I'm always thinking about is shared values. Are we going to be able to go the distance with our values, or do we have deal breakers? If I believe in honesty and she believes in deception, that's a deal breaker. If I want to have kids and she never does, that's a deal breaker. If I want to live on one side of the world and she insists on living on the other side of the world, deal breaker. If I treat people well and she's a bitch to people, deal breaker. So first I've got to understand the basic core values beyond attraction, beyond shared common interests, the actual values and principles that we live by, the things we think are important, that we've shown with our behavior, we're going to continue thinking they're important long term. Are those things aligned, or is there friction there that cannot be resolved? Now, if there's friction that cannot be resolved in the relationship, if there's friction that can be resolved, resolve it without compromising who you are. And if there's no friction, then you've got to ask, well, why do I feel like leaving? If I've got somewhere where I've got good value alignment, at the very least, we now know that a good long-term friendship could be maintained. And when it comes to a relationship, we're asking about the romantic element as well. But we know a relationship in terms of platonic could be maintained if we have strong value alignment. Like I can hang out with anyone long term if we got strong value alignment. We both believe in, at a core, at the same kind of moral code, then we'll at least get along well for a long period of time. But what if there's no attraction left, or there's a brief dip in attraction, you're not having sex for a while, or whatever, like this kind of thing that often leads people to start looking elsewhere. Well, first off, have you talked about it? I can't believe how many people start thinking about being with someone else and they haven't even tried to address the problem directly with their partner. It's ridiculous. You want to make sure that by the time you leave your partner, you have tapped out every available option. You haven't just gone like, well, they should just know. And gone, fuck it, I'm bailing. Like, that's pathetic. That's childish. Work on it. They don't know. Address it with them. Have you gone to get some relationship counseling? Have you at least sat down at the table and said, look, this is bothering me. We need to do something about it. Have you tested to see if behavior will change when it's confronted? Because you shouldn't even be looking at other people until that's done. If you're looking at other people before that's done, you're the problem, not them. Like I said, the main question you ask yourself, how did I get to this position where I'm even considering someone else? Well, how did you get to the point where you haven't even tackled the issues in your relationship and you're looking to jump ship? You want to make sure that there's going to be no regrets. That when you leave this person, you can always say, hey, we tried to make it work and it did not. You don't want to be leaving them and getting that yearning that so many people do when they betray their partners and go to someone else. Of, oh my God, I should have stayed. You want to make sure that as soon as that comes up, you're like, no, 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 no. We tried to make that work. That wouldn't work now. It wouldn't work then. It couldn't work in the future. We maxed it out. So have you tried solutions? Have you tried all the solutions? Or at least a reasonable degree of effort where you're like, there's no further effort needs to be required. This is not working out. We're chalk and cheese. And have you already committed 100%? Not promised, but committed. Are you behaving like a partner who's all in? So many guys, like one of the main complaints I get from both sides, from men and women, is that the sex has died off. And, the guys stop initiating sex, or the girls reject sex quite often. And on both sides, I'm looking at it going, yeah, but what did you do about it? A woman will complain that her man's not initiating sex, and she doesn't even talk to him about it. right? She doesn't even find out why it's not happening anymore. Could it be something she's doing that puts him off? Could it be that he's been allowed to get complacent and lazy, that she did all the leading and she needs to make sure he does it more, whatever. And then the guy's like, oh, my wife rejects me. It's like, did you do anything to turn her on? Did you make her horny? Because here's the funny thing, like, for any guy who complains about his wife rejecting him, I promise you she won't reject you if she's horny. So the question comes, why isn't she horny? Before you start going like, oh man, like this isn't working out, go, well, have I gone all in on it? Have I pulled my weight? Am I sitting around like some bitter person waiting for them to make their move? Or am I going to make my move and at least give it a go and know I've tried my best, as well as confronting them about not making their move? If you go like, well, I tried 3 months ago and he said no, so I'm not doing it again. Well, then you're the problem, not him. Okay? He's got problems too, but you're the problem. And you got to ask yourself, is this an avoidance issue or a relationship issue? Is this a problem with me or a problem with us? You'll know it's a problem with you if it keeps happening with every partner you have. And it happens in your friendships. There's so many people who are like, oh man, everyone's awful. It's like everyone's awful or you're awful. If you're in conflict all the time, you're the problem. Either you're choosing people who are high conflict or you're provoking conflict in some way. If your relationships are always struggling in the same way, that's a you thing, not a relationship thing. Now, if previous relationships have been great and this one's going badly, this might be more on the other side of the fence, or it might be the dynamic between the two of you. But you've really got to figure it out. Is this me self-sabotaging, backing out, or being even too anxious and causing problems that suffocate them, make them want to go away? Is this really just me and I do this to everyone? Or is it the dynamic between the two of us? Is this a 50-50 thing that needs to be worked on? Like I said, if you work on your shit first, then you'll be able to see whether or not they've got a problem. Let's say, like I said before, if your wife keeps saying no to sex, do everything you can to make her horny, and then see if she keeps saying no. So make sure you've done your 50% before you start thinking that there's a problem in the relationship. So once you've figured out all of this, you've tried everything to make it work. You made a commitment, you try to make that commitment pull through. You've checked everything. Is this a brief issue? Are we just going through a rough patch? Am I fully committed and all in? Am I behaving like someone who's a good partner myself? Am I worth staying with? And therefore, they could reciprocate that and so on. And that doesn't work, then end the relationship. We're still not even thinking about other people yet. You just know this one doesn't work. So get out. You've got one life. It's an incredibly short one. It gets shorter as you get older. Trust me on that. You don't want to waste time with people. Let's say, I'm kind of making this up, but let's say it takes about 7 relationships to figure all your shit out. You want to get through those 7 as quickly as possible to find the magic number 8 or whatever the fuck it is, right? Very few people get it right in their first go. In fact, I don't think anyone does. And if they did, they're kind of deluding themselves, but I could be wrong about that. But I'd say it takes a few goes to figure out. It's like your first job's not going to be your ideal career, right? You don't even know who you are or what you like yet. It's actually a series of relationships that will help you figure that out. So you got to kind of work through your shit, and you want to do that as quickly as possible. You don't want to waste time. You don't like how many times I've worked with a client where they're in a relationship and they'll be like, "Yeah, we've been together 6 years, and the first 2 were good." I'm like, 4 bad years? How are you still there? That's just at this point, this is masochism. You're just hurting yourself. You must enjoy torture if you're still there after that long. If the bad outweighs the good, you're in a bad relationship. Even if there are good times, it doesn't mean it's a good relationship. Even if you have moments of pleasure and fun, it doesn't mean you're in a healthy long-term relationship. Those two are not the same thing. Even people in highly abusive relationships have some good memories, and they're genuine good memories. Even people who are horrible parents, they had a few good camping trips with those parents. That doesn't mean they're good parents, right? So once you've figured out that this needs to end, you end it, stay single for a bit. Don't just leapfrog onto the next fucking person. Because if that's your pattern, especially, that means you never take time to stop and think, what the fuck's the problem? Why do I keep having the repetitive issues? There's a thing related to trauma therapy called the repetition compulsion. We just repeat ourselves over and over again, trying to solve an unsolvable problem. I see so many people doing this. I'm at the age now, I'm in my 40s. I'm starting to see, particularly the women who are now again single in their 40s after yet another failed relationship, and they just keep repeating like bad choices with relationships. It's coming to a head now because there's also women who want to have children, and that time's really running out. And I can just see, I'm just like, yeah, you haven't learned anything. And you just keep jumping from one guy to another and not learning anything. So you're just stuck in stalemate. Like you're just going to keep doing this. It's not going to get better because learning comes from reflection. You have to look at yourself and go, what happened? What can I take away from this? And people jump too quickly to the next person, not giving themselves time to reflect. Like, if you're in a relationship that just ended, well, something went wrong. Now, maybe it was good at the start and then deteriorated. Maybe at the start you were deluded into who you thought they were, and it ended up sort of manifesting later on. But if it was all good choices, then you'd still be in the relationship and you'd be happy there. So you got to take responsibility. Like it's not like there's something wrong with you. There's no shame in a relationship failing, but it did fail. It was not successful. So what are you going to take away from that? Every failed relationship I've had massive learnings from me, and it's the main reason I've been with my wife for 10 years now, through a lot of hard times. It's all those lessons. When I reflected, now I was kind of forced to be single, call it good luck or bad luck. I really sucked with women, so I had forced to take a lot of time to reflect between every brief interlude with a woman. And so there's a lot of time to kind of realize what was wrong. I didn't have the luxury of jumping to another person, what I call serial monogamy. And I've seen other people and I was jealous of them, like, man, as soon as one thing ends, another jumps up, or they usually have like a crossover where they start cheating and they end up with a new person. They're never single, never alone, lucky bastards. And now I realize, fuck, as we got older, like I was actually the lucky one to have time to learn stuff. They never picked up and they're just in the same shit that they were in at their 20s. I don't want that for you. Set goals to fix the issues that caused the breakdowns in your previous relationships. Sort that shit out, then pursue other people. Make sure that they're different, healthier, more confident people than the previous ones. Don't make the same mistakes. If your current partner is abusive, just leave. Don't try to fix it. There's 8 billion people on the planet. You don't need to settle for someone who's not even going to give you a basic level of respect. I would only put effort into a relationship where there's at least a basic level of respect. Like they're at least trying. They hold themselves back. They could be abusive, but they don't. But occasionally they might be less than awesome, right? That's fine. But if someone's nasty to you, manipulates you, gaslights you, calls you names, hits you, I wouldn't even try to fix that. Fuck that. Even if you got kids, just bail. Really. That's my opinion more than fact. But for me, it's just such low self-worth to try and make something like that work. You're telling yourself you don't deserve better. So, like I said, I know I keep emphasizing this. The key question is, how did I get myself into this situation? Where was my loyalty? How do I allow something with someone else to develop without dealing with the issues in my relationship first? Is there a pattern of me doing this? But if I'm with someone that I don't really like anymore, how did I allow that to happen? Were there early warning signs? How long have I known about this and stayed in the relationship? These are personal problems. They're not problems with somebody else, right? These are issues you have, attachment issues. One thing that can really help is learning to become a good ender, right? To be able to end something as soon as the red flags come up. And I don't mean as soon as you're slightly attracted to someone else or a little bit bored, but as soon as you see incompatibility, right? If you're early on, someone's talking about how much they want kids and you know you don't want it, end it right there and then in that conversation. Don't drag it out hoping somebody will change their mind. You should be ending a relationship before you find somebody else interesting. You should be ending it because it's bad. On the other hand, if you're an avoidant person, you might be ending things arbitrarily on superficial means, in which case learning to stick in with something is going to be the challenge. Where you say, look, as long as they're not treating me badly, and I still at least find them a bit attractive, I'm going to stay in. And that might be the development you need to work on. Either way, I'm not looking for other people. And that I've had to go through both of those developments. In my earlier years when I was desperate for women, I was bad at ending things. I was always the one who was dumped. Because I just wanted to drag it out as long as possible because I was scared I was going to be alone for my whole life. Later on, when I got over that fear, I became bad at committing to things. I was just like, there's always grass is always greener. Like, you have a slight fault in your personality, so dismissed. And I realized like that's going to leave me alone as well. And I had to find that third option. It's not even middle ground. It's just a completely different option of like, if something's good, learn to make it work, keep it going without having to compromise yourself. And I had to overcome my fears of commitment and intimacy, my fear of being rejected or having my heart broken. and see it through with faith in the idea that that's better for me than being promiscuous or being single. And I'm not saying that's for everyone, but for me personally, I've tried being single for a long time. I've tried being promiscuous. I've done both. None of them are as sort of life rewarding in quality as being in a healthy long-term relationship. I know that one's best for me out of all the options available, but I have to work through my commitment issues. If there's a rough patch, I have to build a bridge over that rough patch and not just live for the high moments all the time. You also got to treat yourself like you are at risk. Prevent temptations. Don't allow the slips. Are you sneakily looking at porn or Instagram pictures? Are you flirting a bit too much at work? Spending too much time after work with your colleagues? You know, is that person at your hobby, you're excited to see them and trying to find an excuse to be near them? Are you allowing those boundaries to slip? When you look at your behavior, like, if my partner caught me doing this, would I be okay with it? As soon as he answers no, you're the one with the problem. You need to get on top of this. You're starting to create that self-sabotage pattern. It's like if you're an addict. The best way to manage that addiction is go nowhere near your drugs, right? Don't even allow any proximity whatsoever. If you're an alcoholic, don't go anywhere near alcohol ever. It's the most safest way to manage your health. And if you're someone who has a problem with attachment and avoidance and cheating and so on, don't go near people you're attracted to. I don't mean like isolate yourself, but like if someone cute starts flirting with you, end the conversation or walk away. Value something else better than a bit of instant approval and gratification. Most of all, honesty. Like cheating, betrayal, that all starts with this resentment of secret problems. You got an issue with your partner, you don't speak about it directly, you don't try to solve it. You might do a bit of passive aggressive hinting here and there, but mostly you just hold it in and tell yourself a story about how they're the bad guy. That's one of the key elements to the psychology of cheating is prior to the cheating, the cheater has sold themselves a story as to how their partner is disappointing, letting them down, not being a good partner to remove the guilt of cheating. They don't even notice themselves doing this build up a lot of the time. But if everything's out on the table all the time, then most of your relationship issues will either be sorted or it will be shown that they can't be sorted. Either way, in which case you would end the relationship. So if you're just honest about all your resentments and every problem you have all the time with your relationship, and make sure that's always discussed on both sides, they're encouraged to do it too. As well as the positive. You don't just bitch all the time, right? You emphasize the stuff you like, you validate what you approve of. That'll either create conversations that deal with the issues or allow acceptance to happen, or it'll bring up the truth that, hey, you guys aren't right for each other. And if you've got a problem with commitment, here's my number one practical tip to finish with. One more time. Let's say you're in the dating phase with somebody and you're starting to be attracted to others, you're not sure if you should keep seeing this person. Just ask yourself, do I like them enough? Is the relationship good enough for me to spend one more day with them? If the answer is yes, then do that before you consider anyone else. And just keep doing that until the answer is no. You break it down to one day at a time. It's less overwhelming. The panic about commitment and intimacy and one vagina for the rest of my life, that panic goes away because you're like, look, it's just one more time. I'm not saying anything beyond that. And if someone's good for you, then one more time will never be a problem. If someone's bad for you, you'll be like, oh, I can't be fuck seeing them this week. And that's when you know. But don't do it like, is it this person versus that person? Because it's an unfair comparison. Hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for listening. See you all next time. If you like what you're hearing, you're enjoying the podcast, please check out the link below to join Brojo or get in touch with me personally if you want to talk about one-to-one coaching, dan@brojo.org.